everyone's talking about de-dollarization, but I want to talk about how crypto is the thing that threatens the dollar more than the yuan. And there's problems with crypto, and we'll discuss those as well. You have to realize that it's actually not beneficial for a lot of those countries in BRICS if the yuan takes prominence and it becomes the second head of a multipolar order. Most of those countries in the Southeast Asia region don't want China to rise to prominence. I know there's a thing with Singapore, Malaysia recently, but that's because like basically China bribed Malaysia with like $36 billion or something like that for them to come to that actual stance. After the meeting with the Chinese minister, there might be some corruption in that we don't really know. But the thing is, like, there's a lot of territorial disputes with in that region with the developing countries there. India is another one that would not benefit from China rising up in the world order. They're having constant disputes for water in the Himalayan region, and they have border disputes all throughout the last couple of decades. So India does not actually want China to get that much stronger because of territorial disputes. And pretty much like every single country that borders the South China Sea, like Thailand, Cambodia, those kind of countries, the ones that aren't landlocked. I'm not very good at geography of the region, but the ones that actually border the South China Sea, none of them want China to become like the leader of another bipolar order, because if China does, that gives China a lot more pressure using their yuan to force territorial concessions. And those countries do not want to give up their territorial sovereignty over their waters or their economic trade zone. So the thing is, like, those countries are going to be more aligned with the US than they ever will be with China, because China is going to try to bully them for territorial concessions. And they know this if China actually gets dominance there. Same thing with Japan, South Korea, etc. Except for Russia, and that's only temporarily. All those countries in that like Southeast, in that Asian area would actually rather probably have U.S. homogeny than like a multipolar order where China is the other power. And that includes India. India is using its own currency to actually trade against Russia and not using the Chinese yuan, because India obviously does not want the Chinese yuan to come to huge prominence because of those border clashes. Which brings us to crypto. Crypto isn't actually controlled by one country. And unless that currency is centralized and completely centered in one country, China or no other country can actually control it. So crypto might actually be a very kind of attractive alternative to China, the dollar or the yuan. I don't think the rupee or the ruble is ever really going to play a significant share in the global reserve currency market. So you have the yuan and the dollar. The yuan doesn't really have liquidity because you can't free trade it. So like if you want to get off the dollar, you basically have to go to a crypto, which kind of like brings us to Bitcoin. Now, there are problems with Bitcoin. Things actually need to start being denominated in Bitcoin for Bitcoin to take on that role, because everything is still denominated in a dollar or another fiat currency. If things actually start to get denominated in Bitcoin, that actually might be a problem for the US dollar, but we're still very far away from that. But I actually do think Bitcoin's actually more likely than any other fiat currency to actually replace the dollar. It's too unstable right now because, people don't want like one of your crypto to buy a gallon of milk today and then like only be able to buy a half a gallon of milk tomorrow. Short-term currency stability for every day-to-day use for people in most countries is actually like a lot more important than like long-term investment, because most people in developing world aren't thinking about long-term investment. They're thinking about short-term like economic stability, like can I buy groceries the next day? And I think Bitcoin has a long way to actually go in that, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. To be a reserve, you don't actually need to be, you don't actually need to transact that fast. And with Lightning, they can do that anyways. So the thing is, like, over the long term, Bitcoin's much more of a threat to the dollar than anything else or other cryptos. And I think that's part of the reason the US is actually clamping down on cryptos, because they are the reserve currency, and they actually realize this point. Because they do realize that, like, the other currencies really aren't that much of a threat to them, but a decentralized currency can actually be adopted by everyone, and that does actually threaten their US dollar. But it does have to have stability to actually do so. I think it's more likely that Bitcoin becomes part of the SDR basket sooner or later, rather than just replace dollar as a reserve. But I actually can see like smaller countries starting to transact in crypto to get crypto because they can't get access to the dollar, or they don't really want US homogeny anymore. But realistically, the next reserve, if it's not the USD, it's probably not going to be like China or any of the other big countries either. It's probably going to be like some kind of decentralized currency. as an unofficial like reserve currency, as an unofficial world business currency. I still think we're like 10, 20 years away from that, honestly, at least, if not more. But I do actually think that could be the wave of the future, like far, far off in the future, like my children and my children's children. But we'll see what actually happens. But that's my reasoning why like the yuan or like other like major country currencies won't actually replace the dollar, especially the yuan, because like they have like China has like too many enemies abroad, and not even abroad, like in their own backyard, basically. And yeah, like a lot of the countries there just don't want them to expand regionally. Whereas the U.S., like we're pretty friendly with Canada, with Mexico, we're generally okay for the most part, and yeah, like we're friends with Europe and all like the major economic powers. China's actually developing outside their own region because the countries in their own region aren't going to be as receptive as countries like in Africa and stuff. So that's like kind of my conclusion and my 2 cents of like what's going to replace the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, if anything. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.